They say the hardest part of a journey isn't the walking, it's the waiting at the edge of the road for someone who never comes back. Tonight, we aren't just telling a story. We are going on a journey through the red dust of the savannah, into the heart of a mystery that many of us carry in our own chests. If you've ever looked at a sunset and felt a name resting on the tip of your tongue, a father, a teacher, a protector who left a void where a mountain should be, then this story is for you. If these sounds and stories bring you peace, please take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. It is the simplest way to support our hearth and ensure these traditions of healing continue to reach those who need them most. And if there is someone in your life who carries a heavy heart tonight, share this journey with them. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is the permission to finally rest. Now, let the world outside fade away. The story begins now. The boy, for in the shadow of the great baobabs, he still felt like a boy, stood at the edge of the village, his silhouette a sharp ink blot against the bruised purple of the twilight. His name was a quiet one, whispered by the wind, but his heart was a drum that played only one rhythm. The rhythm of waiting. To his left were the familiar fires of home, the smell of roasting maize, and the low hum of grandmothers telling tales. To his right was the copper road, a long, silent ribbon that stretched into the belly of the savannah until it was swallowed by the horizon. It was the road his father had taken when the seasons were different, on a morning when the air was thick with the scent of coming rain. He remembered how the man had looked, broad-shouldered and steady, walking with a gait that seemed to pulse in time with the earth itself. The man had promised to return before the harvest moon, but the harvest had come and gone a dozen times, and the road remained stubbornly empty. The villagers spoke in hushed tones when the boy passed. Some said the desert had claimed the father, others whispered that he had found a city made of gold and forgotten the red dust of his birth. But the boy knew better. He felt the absence not as a void, but as a presence that followed him like a second shadow. Every evening, he returned to this exact spot, a sentinel of the dust, searching the shimmering heat haze for a movement that never came. The hook. But tonight, the air felt electric, humming with a frequency he hadn't felt in years. As the first star, the eye of the ancestor, blinked into existence, the boy noticed something he had missed in all his years of watching. There, at the very edge of the road, half buried by the shifting sands, was a piece of weathered wood. It wasn't just any wood, it bore the distinct, rhythmic carvings of his father's chisel. A secret had been waiting for him in the dirt, a breadcrumb left not on the road, but within it. He knelt, his fingers trembling as they brushed away the soil. The ache in his chest flared, a hot spark in the cooling night. He didn't know it yet, but the journey wasn't going to take him away from the village. It was going to take him deep into the heart of everything his father had touched. The boy carried the wooden fragment as if it were a living ember, cradling it in his palms as he retreated from the road and slipped into the labyrinth of the sleeping village. He moved past the dying fires until he reached a small, solitary hut at the very edge of the compound, the workshop. The door was bound with a thick, rusted chain, a metal throat that hadn't spoken in years. But as he pressed the carved wood against the lock, he felt a strange, magnetic pull. With a low, heavy groan, the door yielded, swinging open into a darkness that smelled of ancient cedar, dry earth, and the lingering ghost of wood smoke. Inside, the air was thick, frozen in time. As the boy struck a small match, the flickering light danced across walls lined with the tools of a master. There were chisels of all sizes, mallets worn smooth by 1,000 strikes, and half-finished carvings that looked like creatures frozen in mid-leap. In the center of the room stood the great loom, its skeletal frame rising toward the thatched roof like the ribs of a giant. This was where his father had spent his days, weaving the stories of their people into vibrant indigo cloth. The hook. He placed the fragment he had found on the workbench, and his eyes widened. The patterns on the small piece of wood matched exactly the carvings on the workbench itself. They weren't just decorations. They were a code, a rhythmic sequence of notches and grooves. He realized then that his father hadn't just been making art. He had been writing music into the wood. As the boy's fingers traced the sequence, a low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the table, a sound so deep it felt as though it were coming from the bedrock beneath the village. It was the PAPAOUTAI rhythm, but here, in the workshop, it didn't sound like a question. It sounded like an instruction. He looked at the loom and saw a single thread of crimson silk still hanging from the shuttle. It was a thread that shouldn't have been there, a color his father never used. Suddenly, the boy understood that the workshop wasn't a place of memory, but a place of work that was still in progress. The father had left the loom waiting, not for a return, but for a continuation. The boy reached out, his hand hovering over the shuttle, and as he did, the shadows in the room seemed to shift, coalescing into the faint, shimmering outline of a man standing right beside him. The boy's hand didn't tremble as it finally closed around the shuttle. The crimson thread felt warm, almost like a vein pulsing with life. As he pulled the first strand across the loom, the wooden frame creaked, a deep, rhythmic sound that echoed the low thrum of the gem. Click-clack, click-clack. It was the sound of a heart beating back to life. With every pass of the shuttle, the shimmering silhouette beside him grew more distinct, a figure woven not of flesh, but of the very moonlight that poured through the gaps in the thatch. He began to weave, and as he did, the workshop transformed. The walls seemed to dissolve, and the boy felt as though he were sitting in the middle of the open savannah, the stars hanging so low he could almost touch them. He wasn't just weaving fabric, he was weaving time. The patterns emerging on the loom were scenes he had forgotten. His father's laugh during the harvest, the way the man had once carried him on his shoulders across a flooded stream, the quiet strength in the hands that had taught him how to carve his first toy. But then, the crimson thread began to pull tighter, guiding his hand toward a pattern he didn't recognize. It was a map of stars, a celestial path that didn't lead down the red road, but upward, into the infinite dark. He realized with a jolt of clarity that the long journey his father had taken wasn't across the land at all. The father hadn't left the village to find another city. He had been called to join the great weavers in the sky, the ancestors who keep the seasons turning and the rivers flowing. The silhouette beside him leaned closer, and for a fleeting second, the boy felt the familiar, rough calluses of his father's palm brush against his cheek. It wasn't a ghostly chill, it was a searing, grounding heat. The PAPAOUTAI rhythm in the background surged, the log drums becoming louder, more celebratory. The question, "Where are you?" was being drowned out by a powerful, echoing answer that vibrated through the wooden loom. "I am the work. I am the rhythm. I am the hand that guides yours." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of recognition. He saw now that the loom was a bridge. As long as the shuttle moved, the bridge held. As long as he created, the father was present. But as the crimson thread began to run thin, the boy saw a final, glowing symbol appearing at the center of the cloth, a symbol that explained exactly why he had been chosen to finish this piece tonight. The boy stepped out of the workshop, the finished cloth draped over his arms like a fallen cloud. It was heavier than any fabric he had ever touched, humming with a soft, internal light that made the surrounding darkness look pale. The village was now in the deepest womb of the night. Even the dogs had ceased their barking, and the embers of the communal fires had cooled to a silver gray. He walked toward the center of the village, where the great baobab stood, the tree that was said to be the anchor of the world, its roots reaching down to the ancestors and its branches holding up the dreams of the living. As he approached the ancient tree, the air began to move. It wasn't a wind, but a breath, a slow, deep inhalation from the earth itself. The boy spread the crimson and indigo fabric upon the gnarled roots of the baobab. The symbol he had woven at the center, a golden circle entwined with a heartbeat, began to pulse. Suddenly, the silence of the village was broken not by a noise, but by a symphony of whispers. The baobab began to glow, its bark shimmering with the faces of those who had gone before. The hook. The boy looked up and saw them. They weren't just shadows, they were the guardians. And standing at the forefront, leaning against the massive trunk with the same casual grace he always had, was his father. But the man was not looking at the road. He was looking at the boy. He was looking at the cloth. The father reached out and touched a leaf of the baobab, and as he did, the boy realized the final secret of the Papau mystery. His father hadn't disappeared into the horizon. He had become the very infrastructure of the boy's life. Every time the boy had sought shade, it was his father's arms. Every time he had tasted the well water, it was his father's provision. The "where are you?" that had haunted the boy's childhood was revealed to be a misunderstanding of the senses. The father hadn't been away, he had been underneath. But there was a price for this revelation. The father gestured toward the horizon, where the first faint line of dawn was beginning to crack the sky. The boy realized that as the sun rose, the vision would fade, and he had only seconds to ask the one question that had burned in his throat for a decade. He stepped forward, his voice a mere tremor in the vast night. "Why did you leave the work for me?" The father's image began to flicker like a candle in a breeze, but his smile remained wide, proud, and timeless. He leaned in close, his voice a rustle of leaves against the boy's ear, delivering a truth that would change the boy's life forever before the light could reclaim the world. The first light of day arrived like a cold, sharp blade, cutting through the amber illusions of the night. As the sun's warmth touched the bark of the great baobab, the air grew suddenly thin. The boy reached out to touch the shimmering hem of his father's robe, but his hand met only empty air. The figures, the whispers, and the glow didn't just fade, they evaporated, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like lead. The boy stood alone. He looked down at the roots of the tree, expecting to see the magnificent crimson and indigo cloth he had spent the night weaving. But his heart stopped. There was no cloth. There was only a pile of unspun, tangled thread, dusty and gray, lying in the dirt where he had been sitting in a trance. He looked at his hands. They were not the hands of a master. They were stained with the same old dirt, trembling with the same old cold. He turned back to the workshop, his pulse racing, and saw the door still locked with the same rusted, undisturbed chain. It hadn't been opened in years. The song in the cedar, the weaver of moonlight, the embrace under the baobab, it had all been a fever dream of a mind pushed to the brink by longing. The father hadn't returned. The father hadn't sent a sign. The road was still empty, and the horizon remained a flat, uncaring line. But as the boy stood there in the raw, honest light of morning, he felt something shift, not in the world, but in his own bones. He realized the most brutal and beautiful truth of all. The father was truly nowhere to be found, and that was exactly why the boy had to become the man. The rhythm didn't come from the ground or the trees. It had been coming from his own chest the whole time. He didn't need a ghost to give him permission to weave. He looked at the locked workshop and realized he didn't need his father's tools. He had his father's blood. The twist wasn't that the father was a spirit. The twist was that the father was gone forever, leaving a space so large that the boy had no choice but to grow until he filled it. He walked away from the road for the last time. He didn't look back. He didn't search. He simply sat on his own porch, picked up a piece of plain wood, and began to carve. Not to find a memory, but to create a future. The search ended because the seeker had finally decided to be found by himself. The road remained empty. And for the first time in his life, the boy was perfectly at peace with that.